We welcome you on today to our second segment of Mental Health Monday Moments. Today, we are going to talk about youth and teen lives matter, tending to the mental health of our children. And I'm a firm believer. I think about, when we start talking about therapy, typically our minds doesn't always shift to our children. And I believe that we have experienced some things in our world and in our community that prove to us that the mental health of our children certainly requires our attention. Today, to help shift our focus, we have two wonderful women who are here who are experts in their field and can speak to this topic and can again help us to shift our focus to our children and give our children the attention that they need. Today we have with us Annika Langford, who is a dual certified psychiatric mental health and family nurse practitioner. We thank God for you on today. And we also have Tony Kelly, who will be with us for more than one segment. And Tony Kelly is a licensed clinical social worker and owner and CEO of Tony Kelly Counseling and Consulting. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us for these Mental Health Monday moments. We thank, God for the opportunity to be able to share in this capacity as a church, because the mental health of our congregants is so important. God says that He desires for us to prosper and be in good health, even as our souls have prospered. So I thank God that you all are here to help our congregants meet any of the needs that they have in the mental health area.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. So we're going to open this door wide with the moments that we have to kind of dive into this topic about the mental health of our children. So we're going to talk about the Antioch school shooting.
Heavy one.
Heavy,
Yeah.
right? All the more heavy even for us because we are recording right down the street
Right. Absolutely.
from where this shooting occurred. Now, as much as we don't know the specific issues of Solomon Henderson, who was the gunman, we only are aware of what the news reported to us. But we know that he had to been dealing with some issues because of just the way that things played out. But the news did report self-hate, right? So let's talk about if that was the case or if that is the case for any of our youth and teens. What does that look like for them to carry that in their daily walk? How heavy is that? What are they experiencing if they are dealing with self-hate? Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that self hate stems from one, a lack of knowledge, So I don't think that our children are educated about loving themselves and embracing their differences and walking in their unique, self. And I think part of that stems from parents and us not pouring into our children and teaching them. But also, I always go back to it takes a village to raise a child. And I think that in these days, we don't see that as much. So you don't have many people pouring into these children. And I think that we'll touch on social media, but social media and what other kids are doing and just the influence, it kind of fuels this inability to love oneself. And when you are not dealing with it or in therapy or we're not acknowledging it or even recognizing it, then I think it just fuels into something bigger like we saw in this situation.
Yeah. And if we're thinking about it from a biological standpoint, going through adolescence, you got puberty, all of these
Absolutely.
things going on in terms of hormones. So we expect for them, that's a time in life where you really don't know yourself. But self-hatred, that's a different piece. That's an added layer, to get to that point, it can be lack of community, it can be too much time with social media, because a lot of social media is not reality, and this is the generation now where they were raised, with technology and social media and all of these different things. And so I think, that too is a part of the journey that teenagers are struggling with. Yes, you don't know yourself, but to hate yourself, something's missing, you know, and it could be those various different things that you just, you know, pointed out.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
So if we have anybody in our congregation or even in our viewership whose child or children may be experiencing dealing with some self-hate, is there any signs that they could be looking for?
Yeah, I think self-hate specifically is, I'm not going to say that it's difficult to identify, but I think the changes we see just in mental health in general, right? So changes in behavior, changes in mood,
Yeah.
you know, where it's not just self-hate specifically, but it can be multiple things.
Right.
Lack of, you know, feeling worthy, you know, where kids may not, you know, I don't like myself in this, or, you know, I'm not going to wear that. And as parents, we have to recognize and hear these things.
Yeah.
And I'm very big about pouring into my children, you know, and letting them know, like, no, you're enough. And, you know, you're beautiful and your skin is beautiful. And I think that so early recognition allows us to have some of these interventions, but we have to recognize them first.
Yeah, and it requires a lot of conversations. You know, one of the struggles with parenting is you feel like you're like repeating yourself constantly, you know, and it's like, okay, when is something gonna stick, you know? But conversations are so important during this age frame, you know, of course, at any point of growing up, but, you know, they need to hear from you. They are beautiful. They need to be challenged on, why did you say that about yourself? Let's talk about that, you know, and not from a shame standpoint, but let's explore that more, you know, and like, where is that coming from? And also, they don't need to hear us talking about ourselves in those ways, you know, and so, you know, those are some of the factors that really play into that, you know?
That's good. You know, I hear a lot in what both of you all are saying. But Annika, you touched on just some behaviors, you know, that could show up, and even some of the things that they were saying. And that takes me to Mark 9, verses 21 through 24, where, you know, the young man who had been possessed by an evil spirit. And we know that there were some behaviors that were showing up. He was not behaving as God had created for him to behave. There, he just adversely, some things were showing up. So we were able to see these things. And so when we think about you know, these issues that are present and how they show up, how does a parent first recognize these issues? I heard you say, you know, listen to what they're saying, but what are some other things that parents can do to just kind of be hyper vigilant to hear and first recognize the things that are going on with their children?
Yeah, I think you have to notice first the minor changes. You know, they no longer want to kick it with their friends, you know, or they're staying in their room a lot more, you know, or when you go in there, the door's shut and they're rushing to get off something, you know. It's the minor changes. It's the, you know, I'm more tired, or, you know, I'm moody, and, you know, or I'm more anxious. Like, I used to like going to the mall, but now I feel anxious, you know. And so I think we have to be attuned with our kids enough to notice the minor changes, the really small changes that over time add up. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree. And I feel like those minor changes progress when they're untreated and unrecognized, right? So it may start off as, oh, I want to be alone, right? And then you look up 3 months later and no communication has happened.
Friends no longer
You
coming
know,
over. Yeah.
you
all of
know,
those
and so
different
I think it just kind of continues to progress if we don't identify and treat, for sure.
So I think what I'm hearing both of you all say is that, you know, don't take, you know, even small changes in your child's behavior for granted. You know, continue to pay attention as a parent and make sure that you're, again, tending to their behavior, because tending to their behaviors may also mean that you're tending to their mental health.
Yeah. And as parents, talk to other parents.
Absolutely.
Hey, not to compare your children, but to say, hey, I'm noticing this. You know, have you noticed that in your child? You know, and if so, how did you handle it? You know, again, it's going back to community. We have to have those conversations with other parents or mentors and be like, I'm a little concerned. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. And I always say in this age group, normal does not equal healthy, you know? So, you know, so
We were all teens.
absolutely.
We acted abnormally a lot.
Absolutely, you know, so really honing in on that. I mean, and just focusing on, just because they're doing this or it's routine, you know, it doesn't mean that it's healthy or we should allow it, you know? So really being able to say, like, let's make some changes, or let me ask some of these difficult questions, right? And I think the other thing for parents is like, and if you don't feel comfortable talking to me about it, then identifying someone who you do feel comfortable doing
Yep.
so.
That's good. That's good. I think about, the place I kind of want to go next is about, what kids are exposed to and how their exposure certainly leads to the things that they experience. And let's talk about social media. Lord, it took all I could. If it weren't for my Vanderbilt divinity friends, I probably still would not have a Facebook page. They were like, no, you're getting a Facebook page, because I'm like, I don't know if I really want to be fooled up with all of that. So even as an adult now, probably 14 years out with a Facebook page and Instagram, those things, I am, as an adult, I have to manage my time on those things, how the things that I'm taking in, how I let them shape, who I am or my thought pattern. Let's talk about how teens are exposed to so much on social media, how it impacts the way that they identify, how it impacts their lack of social involvement, even with their parents and perhaps even with their friends. Let's talk about the impact of social media and what they're exposed to there and how that can contribute, obviously, to their mental health.
Yeah. You want to start?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one. Because as an adult, like even for me, sometimes I feel like social media is overwhelming, and it's toxic. And, I find myself saying like, okay, I need a break from this, right? I got to fast from this. And children may not have that same capacity to do so, So I think we see that they become overwhelmed. But, research has shown that 42% of kids are bullied online, right? Like, period. 42% of them just across the board. So you have about 50% of kids that are automatically getting negative reactions, negative feedback, and there's a negative connotation associated with social media. It's rough, like I couldn't imagine logging on and somebody threatening me or, whatever the case may be. And our kids see it so much.
They do. And the brain is still developing. The brain is still developing. And even when you think about social media and just technology, I don't know all of the research, but there is more and more information coming out about attention spans. A lot of us, we're used to a 20-second clickbait or something, and so a lot of us have difficulty paying attention, and we're adults and our brains are fully formed.
Absolutely.
So think about a child or an adolescent whose brain is still developing. And they're constantly seeing these different images, or they don't understand that a lot of this is scripted, so they're thinking it's real life, and and everyone's an influencer, and so it becomes very difficult for children to really understand, is this reality? And I don't even think they have the ability at that age to question if this is reality, because they're still figuring out reasoning and all of these different things. And so it is just a very crucial point in their life where as parents, we give them these devices, but we need to set limits, in terms of how much time they engage with these devices.
Absolutely.
That's great. That's a great segue too, because the next place that I kind of want to touch on is, as we kind of talk to parents who are listening in, to how do parents parent responsibly, right? Not only in making sure that their child is guarded from, the impact of social media, but even things that are going on around them. Because when we think about, Solomon, my God, what had he experienced? What harm had been done to him, or at least allowed to come his way, that caused him to respond in the way that he did. So dealing with, allowing parents to responsibly deal with the root of the issue before there is fruit from the issue. So think about that. But I also want to say, because I think about, sometimes parents don't deal with these issues for fear of being judged or placed at fault because of the issues that their children have. So talk about parenting responsibly, and then even how parenting responsibly looks like not hesitating or having any reservation about making sure, if you notice some of these things, that you tend to them and tend to them quickly.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think that as far as the responsibility that parents carry, right, it's a great one. But I think that when parents start to understand that me intervening, right, me making some of these difficult decisions to ask some of these difficult questions, me implementing some of these boundaries, whether you like it or not, right, is ultimately, it's ultimately going to help your child in the long run. So I feel like a lot of times when I see patients, I get children and parents that come in and it's too late, right? We're too far gone. We're already caught up in the juvenile system. We've already caught some type of case. We're already exposed to drugs and recreational, alcohol or illegal activities. And it's because parents a lot of times will say, had I done something earlier, And so I feel like doing it, right? It doesn't matter what other people think or, how your family members may feel about it. I think it's necessary for the improvement and the betterment of the child. And if we keep that in the forefront of our minds as parents, that it's all about this child, right? We want to save this life is ultimately what we're attempting to do. Then I think it makes our decisions easier. It makes the burden lighter to carry when we think of it from that perspective.
Yeah, because we know we'll see the fruit of the labor
That's it.
later on down
That's
the
it.
line.
That's
you
it.
know,
Once we do the work.
Once we do the work, and as parents, I think we also have to think about why we need community. Because when you're ready to tap out, somebody else can tap in there, and pour into that child. And so as parents, we may be ashamed or embarrassed, but we need community. No, they literally do not give you a handbook. They send you home with a newborn baby and you got to figure it out as you go, and unless someone tells you, you don't know, and so you build your community, so that everyone can pour into that one child, and constantly be talking and be transparent with your child,
Oh, that's good. I think what I hear both of you all saying too is about, making sure that parents don't feel any shame, and that they're alone in this because you feel like, well, am I exposing, my child, and put my child's business on Front Street or even our household's business on Front Street, right? But making sure that you don't carry that shame and that embarrassment and making sure that you just tend to, again, the well-being of the child.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
And I think another point is that parents will ask, what did I do wrong? And I think it's very important to tell parents and to let them know that, you could have done it all right. Right?
And still.
That's it. Yes.
That's good. As we get ready to close out, you guys have packed this segment in with a lot of knowledge. And just thinking about what you said, I think about the scripture in John 9, 1 and 3, where the child had been blind from birth. And the question was asked, who sinned? Was it his parents or was it the child? Right? And just saying, speaking kind of to that scripture, saying, it wasn't anybody's fault. This just happened, that the glory of God might be revealed. So I think if there's one thing that we could close on, as we have parents, or caretakers or guidance counselors, whoever is listening in, make sure that you remove everything out of the way. If you see anything that looks like even just the size of a mustard seed that is going on with your children, take the time and make sure you tend to that, because we do not want to see any fruit from that seed that has been planted. We certainly thank you all for joining us on today for segment 2 of our Mental Health Monday Moments. Again, tune in to us next week where we will be dealing with a fresh topic. I'm not going to reveal to you today what it is. You just got to tune in and make sure that you have a listening ear and an open heart. Until then, we'll see you next time.